So let's talk about NerdCon. I'm Adele, the director and co-writer for the Link Space. I just got back from this amazing event in Minneapolis called NerdCon Stories. I got to talk to a lot of incredible creators, storytellers, and authors. And I interviewed some of them about their relationship with stories and with language. It was super fun, and I want to thank everybody who took the time to talk with me. Let's see what they have to say.
I mean, I like the mess of language. I feel that I imbue monologue or comedy with as much poetry as I can find in the language, because there are words that do evoke multiple images, and sometimes not necessarily ones that congeal. So I like that. I like the, I don't know, I like the mess of it. I like the mess of humanity. I think that there is a beauty of certain things finding a union out of the morass of language. And so I try to conjure that as much as possible. And, sometimes I just go plowing through like a bull in a china shop, because that's more my personality. But I don't know, I've always loved language. It's a great sort of pig pen, or not pig pen, whatever. It's a big pile of mud you get to play in.
I think that when I write something, I feel like I always I use the mess the first time. I write really quickly, so I'll write whatever I'm writing and not care about how messy it is, and then I'll just do constant revision to make it pretty. Sometimes the mess is part of the prettiness. Sometimes it's the way this came out as being really sort of natural and spontaneous is good. But otherwise, I just try to clean up as much as possible with constant revision. I guess just I try to find a way to sort of find commonality in language. People are the purpose of language is to express messages, right? So if no one gets the message, then you failed. So I can write things really sort of intelligently, and I can sound really pretentious, but no one's going to understand what I'm saying. So I try to make sure I use language in a way that people can understand, and I guess in a way that people can be empathetic towards and laugh at. I like humor for that.
So my background is more in the world of academia, and so I am really used to jargon, and also how do you translate jargon to actual normal people speak? And also, how do you translate jargon across genres, right? So there are fields that study this particular thing and call it one thing, but in another field you might call it something different. And so when I approach writing something or talking about a topic, I want to make sure that I'm using the words that resonate most with the audience that I'm going to be presenting it to. So in my line of work, I write a lot about brain development and about child psychology for early professionals, people who work with kids. And when I do that, I have to think about, I can't go into the nitty-gritty about this particular part of the brain does this thing. It's more about the overall messaging of, it's really important to support young kids early and build relationships with little kids because it helps build their brains for a better future. So figuring out ways to phrase those kinds of things has been a really interesting challenge, but one that I've really enjoyed doing.
Honestly, when I'm trying to get a message across, especially for video purposes, I try wording things in many different ways before I actually use that as the way I'm going to say it. I'll do multiple takes and just try different things, twist words around, because if it makes sense in my head, it might not necessarily make sense to other people. So, you film it, and then sometimes I'll have a person there listening and they'll give feedback, or even if I go back and watch it later and realizing it doesn't make sense, going back and editing what works and what doesn't.
I consider myself a pretty good communicator, and that said, I try to take responsibility for all of the words that I use. I write a lot of jokes, and I tweet a lot of sarcastic things, and sometimes when people challenge me with those things, I have to really respond and figure out what I meant. And so there was a book called The 4 Agreements. One of the agreements is be impeccable with your word. And I take that very literally, very seriously, especially if I'm writing something that's more poetic and less straightforward. I don't want it to be. I want it to be clear in terms of story, but I don't want it to be clear in terms of the words that I'm using. I want to make sure I do my best to craft it in such a way that it makes sense, and then I trust my collaborators to tell me that what I've said makes sense and what I haven't said makes sense. Especially because I love the way words change and morph. And sometimes they mean something, and sometimes they mean the different thing that it didn't mean before.
I think the way that I use language is definitely influenced by the stories that I interact with. I think that most, I don't know, I think that most people are sponges, especially the younger or the more vulnerable or the more listening that they are. And I definitely have found, particularly navigating the world of solo performance or live stage storytelling, otherwise performance, and even stand-up comedy, I think that all of that has completely influenced the way that I tell stories and the way that I phrase things. I mean, it's particularly difficult in comedy because at times you have to go did that idea come from me or come from someone else? But then all the ideas come from the sort of someone else, and there's nothing new under the sun, so it came from somewhere else. In a general, wider context, it's more important about how you're using it. But I definitely feel, because of the specific spoken word format in which I put my writing out, that it definitely is an amalgam of things, but I think that's like modernism, you know what I mean? It's like whatever, that pastiche, that mosaic of so many different things. I think that's kind of where we are in history. It's like being a DJ for language, and it's like about how you spin it, not if you made it.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that the way that I have learned to write and speak is heavily influenced by stories, more so than probably anything else. I feel actually now a lot of times with the way that other people in general, their language is influenced a lot by their reading online, like Tumblr and stuff like that. But definitely stories help a lot, and stories aren't confined to just 300-page novels. So stories they read from people on social media, I imagine, also impacts the way that they speak and write, and it certainly has me.
Yes, a million times yes. I think one of the things that's been interesting for me, because I write nonfiction and I write research for practice audiences and for the public, one of the interesting things for me has been pulling in some stories and some fiction stuff into nonfiction. So when I was writing this book that I just put out, I actually referenced some young adult work in it because I felt like it conveyed the emotion and the intent that I wanted to get across about the underlying research that I was trying to talk about. But it makes it more impactful and it allows people to connect with it differently if you're able to pull in a personal story or some sort of story that really can resonate with your audience, even though you're going to talk about brain development 2 pages later. So I think that's a really important connection that is hard, but is really worthwhile.
Yes, the way I use language definitely has been influenced, just because when you're exposed to a certain, whether you're watching the same person do multiple videos or you're reading the same authors through multiple books, you begin to become used to their linguistic tendencies and you almost adapt them to yourself. Even hanging out with certain people, you notice that you begin to start saying things similar to what they're saying, or you notice that they're starting to say things that you personally say, and things you just learn from other people, and all of my language that I use is built upon all the people that I've read from, listened to, talked with, and it's had a large impact on my personal way of communication.
Yes, I do feel that the stories that I interact, the stories with which I interact, and the ones that I read, I think they do influence my language. To me, language is also about our filters, it's about our mores, it's about customs, it's about the zeitgeist, it's about pop culture, and so I often feel as though I have to keep up so that I can communicate with young people. I do a lot of teaching of young people, and I want to be able to communicate with them, and I want to be able to say, hey, I saw this, I was watching So You Think You Can Dance, and whatever, and I can talk about that. And you know, the things that I learned from watching things that I don't know about, Dancing with the Stars. I don't really watch that anymore, but I love network TV. Anyways, there are languages that I have learned just because I'm interacting with these stories that are being told. And so, yes, language evolves, and mine has. Yes.